So good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our final speaker series event for the year for the Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. My name is Kenji Yoshino, and I'm the director of the center. I'd like to start by thanking the sponsors of our speaker series for their support. We have Cravath, Davis Polk, DLA Piper, Fried Frank, Kirkland and Ellis, Latham and Watkins, Paul Weiss, Sullivan and Cromwell, Wachtell Lipton, Weil, and White and Case. And we're very excited and grateful that these sponsors have allowed us to have another great 4 speakers next year, so please look out for that announcement shortly. In particular today, I'd like to thank DLA Piper for sponsoring a reception after today's event. Everyone here is welcome to partake of the food and drink as soon as the event concludes. I'd now like to introduce our distinguished speaker. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Jeremy Bailenson. Professor Bailenson is a founding director of Stanford University's Virtual Human Interaction Lab. He studies the psychology of virtual and augmented reality, and in particular, how virtual experience leads to changes in perceptions of self and others. His most recent research focuses on how virtual experiences can transform educational, environmental, conservation, health, and most importantly, for this event, build empathy. Professor Bailenson is the author of the terrific 2018 book, Experience on Demand, which I would highly recommend. This is how he first came to our attention at the center. And he's also written for a variety of publications, including the Washington Post, CNN, PBS NewsHour, and Slate. Professor Bailenson will deliver his talk, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Please welcome Professor Jeremy Bailenson.
So thank you for that introduction. And I want to thank the Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, not just for inviting me, but for the work that you guys do. I appreciate what you're doing, and thank you. So my name is Jeremy, and for the past 20 years, I've been building immersive virtual reality systems, building worlds inside of them, having experimental subjects put on the goggles and have an experience, and studying what that virtual experience does to the mind, studying how these experiences change the way you think about yourself, others, how you train. And it's been a long road. Imagine that you were me 20 years ago when I switched fields in 1999, and you were at a barbecue, and I introduced myself, and someone said, Jeremy, what do you do for a living? This is 20 years ago. And I say, well, I build virtual reality, and I stick you inside, and I study what happens to your brain. And that'd be a very short conversation. You'd find someone else to talk to really quickly. So the fact that I can be here and think about the work that you guys are doing to change policy, I mean, you just came back from a very important meeting in DC, and I'm thrilled to be able to help you think a little bit about how virtual reality can be used for these issues. So raise your hand, how many guys have done virtual reality before? Okay, about 10% of you. How many guys, instead of just looking around, have gotten to walk around? Okay, about 5% of you. Fantastic. So I'm going to take you back to the year 2001. In 2001, I was a 26-year-old postdoc, and we took all of my VR equipment and we flew it to Washington, D.C., where the Federal Judicial Center was having a conference about how one might use virtual reality in the courtroom. For example, recreating crime scenes so that you can get a sense of perspective, or having witnesses do police lineups by looking at the goggles and looking at suspects. And so we were there in a room with about 500 lawyers and federal judges. These are kind of VIP Washington, D.C. crowd. And we'd set up our equipment. We'd brought it all the way from California. And whenever we do VR demos, we tend to start with our best demo, which is called the pit. Okay? What happens in the pit is you put on these goggles and you look around, and you're transformed into a room that's very boring. It looks just like the room that you're in. And you take a step back, and things get smaller over there. You walk forward, and so walking kinds of work. Then we hit a button, and we drop a chasm. This chasm is about 10 meters deep, and it's about 3 meters to get across, and we put a very rickety plank that you've got to walk across to get on the other side. So it's 2001. We had a federal judge put on the goggles. He was an older gentleman and probably weighed about 270 pounds, a large man, and that detail becomes relevant in a moment. And when he was walking over the plank, He just walked a little bit to his left by accident. Of course, we model gravity, so from his perceptual system standpoint, he saw and heard the floor rushing towards him as he was careening down to the bottom of that pit. Now, if you were in the real world and you fell off of that plank, how would you save your life? You'd have to dive at a 45-degree angle, because remember, you're going down, to try to catch the edge of that lip. So here we are in front of a room full of lawyers and trial judges, and this federal judge literally just dives at a 45-degree angle. Now it gets worse. This is my first public demo. I do 1,000 of these a year now. My render machine was on a table that had a very sharp corner. Okay? So here is this federal judge who's careening at full speed. His face is about to hit the corner of this table. I couldn't catch him. I wasn't physically prepared for that, and he was probably too large to do that. My one move was to smash into him to redirect his trajectory so his face didn't hit. So he was fine. Okay, I didn't get sued. We didn't get thrown in jail. Everything was okay. But I waste 4 minutes of your valuable time to tell the story because it illustrates the concept of presence. Psychological presence is the word we use for when you're doing VR. There's no pixels, there's no field of view, there's no gadgets. The medium disappears, and you have an experience. And so early in my career, all of my publications were not the exciting stuff that I want to talk about today, but they were more boring, studying how the brain reacts in terms of a virtual experience, figuring out how your physiology works. And the title of my book is called Experience on Demand, because you should all walk out of here believing that when we think about VR as it begins to enter our homes, our schools, our businesses, think of it as an actual experience, not a media experience. All right? When you watch TV, when you're on the web, that's a media experience. The brain has not yet evolved to understand that VR is not real. The front of your brain, the rational part, says not real, it's not real, it's not real. The back part, the one that's in charge of keeping you alive, that reptilian old brain, cannot overcome the illusion. So we call this presence. Here's my lab at Stanford. It is a technological masterpiece. I can brag about that because I'm not the one doing the work. The very generous funding and very smart undergraduates that do our engineering. The floor shakes to move your legs. There's a spatialized sound system where 24 speakers can move sound around. We do virtual scent, so when you walk towards objects, they smell a little bit more. It's considered by most to be one of the premier technological destinations in the world. We host heads of state, we host military folks, we host people from NASA. But now that I bragged about my lab, let me tell you that it's becoming very quickly completely obsolete from a hardware technology standpoint. So the goggles that you're seeing on your right are what I used up until about the year 2014, 2015. Each one cost more than my car. I drive a Ford C-Max, so perhaps that's not saying that much, but a $40,000 piece of devices. And at the heyday in 2014, there was probably about 2,000 of them in existence, okay? So the goggles we used to use there, they cost a lot of money, and there weren't that many around. The ones we're using today, I would venture to say a lot of them cost less than the fantastic wine I assume we'll be drinking later on. So goggles cost, some of them $50, some of them a couple $100. Conservatively, there's about 10 to 15 million of them floating around the United States right now. So the question we're going to address in the rest of this talk is the same question that Popper had. This is my grandfather. He's now 94 and he lives in Boca. He was 90 when I took this photograph of him. He put on VR, and for those of you that raised your hand that said you've done it, he had this reaction and you probably had a similar one, which is this kind of cool, but really what's the point? What am I going to do with this thing, okay? And for those of you that raised your hand, how many of you went out and bought a system from Best Buy to put in your house? Yeah. So what we're going to talk about today are the situations in which VR is so useful, you're actually going to go out and buy one and use them. Before we get to all of that, I want to talk about what makes VR special and what are those situations, and it's really all about paradox. In virtual reality, we've already established that the brain treats the experience as a real one. We haven't evolved to understand that it's not real. However, there are no rules. Anything a programmer can imagine, anything she can build, you experience it, and then the brain treats that as if it were real. So we can turn off physics, we can travel back in time, we can make you 40 meters tall, we can put you on the moon, you can have these fantastical experiences, yet the brain will treat them as if it's actually happening to them because of the weird physiological loophole that exists with this kind of magic time in human evolution. So we're going to talk about that special situation. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about the downsides of VR. So thank you for the generous depiction of my book. The book was reviewed fairly widely in the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, Nature, and a lot of places. In general, people love the book. However, there was an utter outcry that Bailenson, you're this hippie from California, you talk about how VR can be used to save the world, but you, like the rest of these Silicon Valley folks, are the ones that are actually ruining the world, and you need to talk more about the downsides, okay? Now, I don't think reviewers actually read books, except for Frank Rose. Is Frank here? Frank wrote the review for the Wall Street Journal, and it was spectacular. But across the rest of them, chapter 2 of my book is all about the downsides. So I'm not convinced reviewers actually read their books, but I want to highlight them for you guys because I think they're critically important. I really do. VR is a medium. We can do great with it. We can do poorly with it, and it's up to us. So let's talk about the downsides. First one is distraction. So I took this photograph of myself not too far from here. On Stanford's campus, and I think it's actually worse in New York City. It seems that people's legs don't move unless their thumbs are moving. Right? We can joke about that, but there are conservatively, how many deaths do you think occur every day because of smartphone distraction in drivers every day? Conservatively, about 10. Okay? Conservative about 10. We could talk a lot about this. I give a whole hour talk just on this. But we've only had one death so far in VR from distraction. It's a horrific event. A man in Moscow in December of 2017 was playing a virtual reality video game, fell through a plate glass table and bled to death. But VR is the most distracting medium in history. You can't see the real world. You can't hear the real world. And so of all the things that we're going to talk about the downsides, the one I want you to think most about is distraction and thinking about, you're cut off for the world, so probably don't do this on the subway, probably don't do this around the cacti or around 3 or 4 dogs in the room. Addiction, very little data on this. I really have not much to say on any scientific understanding of addiction of VR. I think all of us can look in the mirror and say that we rely a little bit too much on our smartphones, some of us more than others. But when online gambling feels like you're in Las Vegas, social networking feels like the best party you've ever been to in your life, when adult activities feel like the real thing, how will society function? And it's something to think about in terms of addiction. Simulator sickness, won't waste your time on this. We've mostly solved this in terms of hardware issues, but in general, my lab, we've got a 20-minute rule. After 20 minutes, take off the goggles, touch a wall, drink some water, look at a person. If you need to go back in, you can. Anybody know what the Guinness Book of World Records is for most time spent consecutively in VR? 36 hours straight. Until 2 weeks ago, and I don't think Guinness has verified it, somebody stayed in for a week. Yeah, we don't recommend that. Media modeling. I want to talk about violent media for a second, and I don't want to talk about desensitization because we'll get there eventually, but there's a large literature that you can use. Violent video games cause people to become desensitized to violence. I don't want to talk about that yet today. What I want to talk about is skill acquisition. So my lab for the last 20 years and beyond that, we've been proudly funded by the US military. I'm proud to help our soldiers get better at their jobs. It's what they do, and VR can help them. I'm convinced VR works in this fashion, and we will get to a point when somebody wants to do violence that they will actually be able to purchase software that trains them to be more successful at this. We have a data point on this. The Norwegian serial killer in 2013 used a video game called Call of Duty with a special scope in it that approximated some kind of a VR to train before he went on his murderous rampage. That being said, I wrote an article for CNN that began with the sentence, video games are free speech and the Supreme Court we should never regulate them. The US Supreme Court ruled that they are free speech. That part was ignored. And then I came up with a set of standards. Wouldn't it be great if video game designers came up with ways that you could still be intensely violent in games, but the skills you learn didn't transfer to the real world? For example, the inputs weren't guns with triggers. You're kind of shooting people by flicking your elbow. Or the things you're shooting don't move at a human speed so you don't learn to lead them. Simple sets of rules that will just make it a little less general. And I can say without exaggeration, I got probably 2,000 hate mails a day for about a month straight after that came out. The video game lobby is quite strong. So, but something to flag for you guys. Kids are unique. I've got a 7 and a 5-year-old. Each has used VR for probably 12 minutes total across their entire life in small doses 6 or 7 times. A woman named Jackie Bailey, she's now a professor at University of Texas. Her dissertation was the first real rigorous piece of work in the area of kids in VR. She bravely took hundreds and hundreds of kids whose age was 3, 4, 5, or 6 years old and put them into VR or had them watch TV. Her project was funded by Sesame Workshop. And the question she wanted to ask was, are kids affected differentially from meeting these social characters like Grover and Elmo in a way that changes the way their cognition works, changes the way they think about these characters? And let me show you a short video of the experience.
Look at both of them, and I want to have them do a couple things for us, okay? Ready?
Oh, hello there! It's Design, your lovable furry friend Grover. Hi. Get up out of your chair and dance with us. Follow our crazy moves. You can do it.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so Jackie looks at 3 things in this study. The first thing she looks at is compliance. For example, she says, follow my crazy moves. And she danced in this video. I will tell you that everyone I run in my lab dances. It can be a Navy SEAL, it can be the coach of the Dallas Cowboys, it could be the president of Stanford, John Hennessy. Doesn't matter. You're in VR, Elmo tells you to dance, you dance. The compliance level is intensely high. With our kids, the kids almost always complied when it was in VR. When you see them on TV, not always. The second measure Jackie looks at is empathy. And the way she looks at empathy is after the kids take the goggles off, they're with their parents, they're in there for about 5 minutes, they take the goggles off, and we then hand them 10 stickers. Kids love stickers, okay, at that age. They just love them. And we say to them, Jackie says, you know who else really loves stickers? Is Grover. Can you give some back to him? And you don't get to take those home if you give them back. Kids give more stickers to Grover when they met him in VR than compared to when they met him on TV. So a more influential medium we know from Jackie's data. The good news is she's run hundreds of kids through at very young ages. So long as it's Sesame Street for 5 minutes, no one's cried, no one's gotten hurt, no one's had visual problems, we haven't had irate parents call back with nightmares. Everything's fine if you keep it to small doses with this type of content. I work a lot with the tech companies, Google, Facebook, Samsung, to help them think about their age ranges. Do you know the age range that Oculus Facebook says for their device? Anyone? 13. It's based on because they make you have a Facebook account. Samsung says the parents should guide. So in general, the field is still figuring this out. If you care about this topic, I wrote a free online an entry for something called Common Sense Media. It's a website for parents to figure stuff out. And everything I know about kids in VR is online there. All right, so given the downsides, addiction, distraction, learning some skills you're not proud of, getting sick sometimes, overuse. The downsides are real. We should save VR for experiences that if you did them in the real world, it would be dangerous to do, impossible to do, counterproductive in the sense you've learned a valuable lesson, but it would come at a cost, or it would be so rare and expensive you couldn't do it. So let's save VR for things that hit one of those 4 buckets. Another way of saying that is if 5 years from now, you guys are putting on goggles to check your email, then I failed miserably as an evangelist in this area. It's not for that. It's for experiences and ones that are more intense. So we're going to start with things that are impossible. And I'm going to take you back to the year 2003, and I'm going to show you the virtual mirror. And this is a paradigm that we use for lots of studies. And we were doing some very, very basic science here, really just trying to understand how mechanics of body movements worked in VR. And a woman named Marcia Satowski, a brilliant woman who at the time worked for Cisco, she came to us and she saw this demo that was really kind of nuts and bolts computer science. Said, Jeremy, could you use this to use diversity training? Is there a way that you can think about training others to have more compassion, to be able to understand other people differently by using this paradigm of a virtual mirror? And I'm going to show you a video of it in a second, but I want to talk about 2 psychological theories that frame this work. The first is called the contact hypothesis. Contact hypothesis, a theory from the 60s, psychologists and sociologists, as they're thinking about segregation in schools, to simplify it drastically, if you take people who are different and you put them together, that mere physical contact is going to cause people to get along. Okay? The second theory I want to talk about is something called body transfer. Body transfer is a neuroscience phenomenon that's been around for just about 15 years that says if you move your physical body and you see a representation, and VR can be an avatar that moves with you, synchronously. So when you move your right arm, you see a right arm move with you. People have done this mechanically with having mechanical arms that move in the right spot. And of course, you can do it in VR. After about 4 minutes of you moving your body and seeing an avatar move with you, the part of the brain that lights up when you think about yourself also lights up when you see this external representation. In other words, after 4 minutes of these exercises, you can train the brain to incorporate an external representation as part of oneself. It's called body transfer. So we did combine those two. What if you did body transfer, and then instead of having contact with someone else to learn empathy, you actually become them, and you walk a mile in their shoes and experience it. And so I'm going to show you a 16-year-old video, and I like to show this to give you a sense of history. Don't laugh at my graphics. I built this myself a long, long time ago. Things have gotten better there. So this is Nick Yee. Nick is a genius, my first PhD student that's responsible for so much great work over the years. So Nick's going to walk around. He's going to walk to the mirror. He does body transfer for about 2 minutes. You're only going to see it for about 10, 15 seconds. He moves his head physically. His avatar moves with him. He looks to the left. His avatar turns to the left. He rolls his head. This goes on for a while. He moves his hands. He bends down. We then hit a button. He comes up, and he's a woman of color. Okay? And the reaction you get when people come up is intense and stunning. Intense and stunning. For lots of people, it's much greater than when that pit opens up and you're looking over a chasm because it's about you. Okay? The next phase in the study is you've now become a woman of color, or you've become someone who's 30 years older, or you've become a different body shape. We've looked at everything you can imagine, and we network a second person into VR. That person then treats you poorly based on your identity. Could be your race, could be your gender, could be your age, and you experience prejudice firsthand while wearing someone else's body, and then we measure lots of things. So over the last 15 years, we've looked dozens and dozens of experiments here. I'll sum them up in a minute, but this is something we've been studying nonstop for almost 16 years. To give an example one, this is a work published by Sunju Ahn. She's now a professor at the University of Georgia. What she did is she had subjects come in, and they had to do this sorting task. Very annoying task. There are these objects. They're all similarly sized, shaped, and colored, and you have to sort them into piles. It's maddening to do when you can see normally. Half of the subjects did what is still the gold standard in diversity training, which is role-playing, pretending you're someone else and going through an exercise. The other half, we actually used the goggles to make them visually impaired. So half of them imagined they were visually impaired while doing this task. The other half became impaired. And they went through and had to do this. When you're impaired, it's impossible to do, just impossible. 24 hours later, we always look at behavior in these instances, by the way. All of us in this room, we want to be better in terms of our green behaviors. We want to be better to others. We want to, do better exercise. VR, I try to use it for these really hard to change, entrenched behaviors. But we never trust what people say because all of us want to be better. We always look at what you do. And so what Sunju did is she contacted these subjects 24 hours later, and she said, look, you've already been paid for the study. It's over. If you want to volunteer and help those who are impaired, here's how to do it. And she gave them a task that was a real task where subjects had to surf the web, find web pages that would be hard to read if you were impaired, and then email the webmaster and tell them that they need to change the fonts, etc. When you become impaired, you spend twice as much time helping others compared to when you role-played. And that magnitude of effect is something we see fairly consistently. In 2013, we're in my lab, and I give a similar spiel to what I just gave to you guys. And a woman from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, her name is Deborah Bay, she said, Jeremy, I believe your findings, but there's two things I don't believe. One is I don't believe it works on real people, meaning not college sophomores at a university. And two, I don't believe these effects are sticky. I don't think they last that long, or at least I don't know that they do. And she challenged us, but she also funded us, which was very generous of her. And for the next 5 years we've been working on this, and I'm very proud to say that Fernando Herrera, the genius that's been doing a lot of this research, we just published this paper a month ago. It shows you how quickly academia grinds. We just published a paper I'll tell you about in a second. Two studies in this paper. One of them had to have a huge sample. We had over 1,000 people. It's now up to 3,000. The second one, we had to look at long-term effects. But if you're going to look at a large sample, you can't rule out half the population. For example, if I was going to only look at empathy to women, and then I lose half the population. We had to have something to apply to a lot of people. So we created something called Becoming Homeless. This premiered as its own piece at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2017. And I'm going to show you a clip from it right now. It was designed to counter something called the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error, coined by psychologist Lee Ross at Stanford University, says, and this is from 5 decades ago, that people, when something bad happens to me, I blame the situation. When something bad happens to you, I blame your character. All of us do this all the time. Okay? It's a really hard thing to reverse. No one's figured out how to do this. What we want to do is try to dispel the notion that all people are homeless because of who they are, and to talk about the situational factors. And I can talk about how we built this in Q&A if it's interesting. I'm just going to show you a short clip right now. You can see a subject sitting in a chair. He's selling items in his apartment. He's now living in his car. Can't live in your car. He's getting arrested. He's now trying to sleep on a bus that lasts for a while, but this guy keeps trying to take his stuff, and now
for
he's
me
going
personally,
around.
not having a place, it's not where you want to be. You gotta keep moving, because if you don't keep moving from spot to spot, your stuff's gonna get ripped off, you're gonna get burned, you're gonna be put in jail.
He's now having conversations with other people who don't have homes, and so. All subjects go through this. When we designed this project, we paired with, in my opinion, the best scholar in the history of empathy. His name is Jamil Zaki. He's a professor at Stanford. He's also a VR skeptic. He doesn't believe this VR is a magic tool that's going to solve all the world's problems. He just wants to study it with me. And so it was critical to have Jamil here because he designed the control conditions not to be ones that were going to just fail, but ones that would actually compete with the project. So the results of this, and again, this paper just came out. Study 1, Fernanda, ran 1,000 people. Study 2, she looked 2 months after the treatment, and this is even with a large sample. What we're measuring here, because remember, we never trust self-report, we actually have a physical petition, and it's a petition that's live in California. It's about an affordable housing measure. And we say to people, after they come out, will you sign this petition to have your own personal taxes increased in order to support affordable housing measures? And we look about whether they sign it. So in the big study, there's 4 conditions, the VR and 3 control conditions, a desktop condition just on a computer, role-playing like one does in a typical corporate setting, and statistics information. And the biggest condition that produces the most signing is VR. And then when you look 2 months later, VR still outperforms control conditions. So a really important data point, the first long-term study and the first large sample study that Fernanda did, and we're very proud of that. Now, despite that, I want to say very clearly, VR doesn't solve all the world's problems. It's not a magic tool. This is some good evidence, but I'm not trying to claim that VR solves everything. Okay, next round of study is about empathy, not just to others, but empathy to yourself. And this is a study that was run by Hal Hirschfield. Hal is now a professor at the business school, and his advisor is a woman named Laura Karstensen. She runs the Center for Longevity. The Center for Longevity at Stanford is not designed to extend life. It's designed to make life better when you're older. So for an example, people who are in their 20s now, they're not putting money in the bank. They're going to live till they're 90 because of medical advances, but the actuarial math folks have figured out they're going to be in poverty by the time they're 60. And so Hal really wanted to chase down this phenomenon. How can you get people who are 20 to think about the future later on? And he was inspired by a philosopher called Parfit that's talked a lot about how humans were really good about imagining short-term pleasure. Like all of us are thinking about the food and the drink that are going to be wheeled out here very soon, and that's amazing. But it's really hard to defer gratification, to think about the pain that's going to be caused later on if we don't defer this gratification. Humans are really bad about this. So Hal came up with an ingenious idea. Let's use VR to have somebody make the future less abstract. And so in this study, subjects came in, we scanned their bodies, and they walked up to the virtual mirror and they did body transfer, and half the subjects saw their own face just how they are. For the other half, we used computer graphics to age them, and they met themselves for how they're going to look when they're 70 years old. Okay? So they had a really intense experience where they got to meet their future self. Okay? Then we gave them an option for some money now, but more money if you put it in a savings account and you don't touch it for a certain amount of time. Okay? In the physical, outside of VR, no one has moved the dial on this. This is intensely hard to do to get a 20-something not take money right now. Hal ran his dissertation, 7 or 8 studies showing that when you meet your future self in VR, you defer gratification more than control conditions. So we published this in the Journal of Market Research, which is a good journal for Hal. He's in a business school. But the fun thing has been now in this era of consumer VR where there's millions of head-mounted displays out is thinking about how to scale this up for society. So the first mover has been Bank of America Merrill Lynch, and they built something called face retirement. And their engineers figured out a way to scan your face from the camera in your laptop. If you today form a B of A account, you'll be asked, do you want to do something called face retirement? If you say yes, you scan your face, and then they age your face, and your future self becomes part of your banking interface such that every decision you make about your money, your future self is staring at you, okay? And the more money you put in savings, the happier your future self gets, okay? And it's a silly little gimmick, but this really falls in the land of win-wins. You know, Bank of America makes more money, and people are not going to be in poverty when they're in their 80s. And I recently had a conversation with Tom Montag, who's the COO. They love this. They're using this all over the place, and the consumers love it as well. I want to talk a bit about a project that's led by Courtney Cogburn. She's an assistant professor at Columbia University, and she and I have been working together for 2 years to produce something called Thousand Cut Journey. This is Courtney's genius and funded by the Brown Institute. And what we produced, this premiered at the 2018 Tribeca Film Festival. It's a very intense 10-minute journey where you become, via body transfer, you become Michael Sterling, a black male, and you experience what it's like to be Michael when he's in elementary school. You experience what it's like to be him as a teenager, and then as an adult in a job interview. And at every step along the way, you experience implicit bias. That's pretty intense, and it's a very powerful experience. So we've just finished building that about 3-4 months ago. What we've been doing since is studying it. Courtney's running 3 separate experiments now to see how well this works in the workplace, as well as in colleges. She somehow managed to convince the entirety of the incoming Columbia class to half of them do Thousand Cut and half of them don't, and she's going to follow the cohort over years to get a sense of these long term. So we're going to have some good data. But the Brown Institute has been they've been encouraging us to place this in companies to, kind of do ethnographies as companies are incorporating this into their diversity and inclusion packages, and we've been doing a lot of really fun work with that I'm happy to talk more about. But Courtney's here in Columbia. She's amazing, and she can show that to you if you'd like. I'm going to skip all my environmental research because I want to focus on diversity and inclusion. I want to now talk about how you scale this up. But just for those that care, you can also have empathy towards the environment. We do a lot of work on that. I'm happy to talk about it. I want to talk about how this scales up. And to do that, we're going to talk about Derek Belch's master's thesis. Derek was an undergrad in my class at Stanford in the year 2005. He was a field goal kicker for the Stanford football team. He came to me after class. He said, Jeremy, can we use virtual reality as a way to make athletes perform better? I said, Derek, it's a brilliant idea. Come back in 10 years, and we'll do it because the technology simply isn't ready. So Derek did. He came back 10 years later, and he got his master's thesis in my lab while he was an assistant coach on the Stanford football team. And Derek performed the Herculean task of convincing Coach David Shaw to donate to us 5 minutes of practice time on Mondays. So for those that don't follow college football, coaches choreograph it down to 30-second chunks. It's intensely valuable. He gave us 5 minutes, and we filmed the quarterback's perspective from where the quarterback would be in 360 video, which was very difficult to do back in 2013. And then that was on Monday. The Stanford defense would pretend to be the team we were playing this Saturday. They would throw up very complicated blitz packages that we thought the Saturday team would throw at us. We would then build this in VR, put it in the football office by Wednesday, and the players would then practice in VR. When I say practice, we're not teaching them how to throw or kick or run. They know how to do that. We're actually letting them mentally rehearse and do decision making. So I'm going to show you a clip of this play, and you'll have a little bit of empathy for quarterback to see how hard it is. So you got to look at the defense and decide who's going to blitz and what's going on with the defense, and they're all trying to trick you, and it moves really fast. You have about this much time pre-snap, okay? The quarterback goes to the line of scrimmage. Basically, he's got 2 parameters he can change. He can change the play. He goes, kill, 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 and you go to the next play down the queue, or he can let it roll, which is keep the original play. For either of those options, he can have a running back move to pick up a block. So we train with this. After 3 weeks, Coach Shaw says it is so effective that he's going to make it mandatory for the players. That season, this is the 2013 season, Stanford vastly outperforms expectations. Both the quarterback Kevin Hogan and the coach David Shaw say one of the reasons for that unexpected success was all the training that they got to do inside of virtual reality. So that's football. Derek Belch graduates January 2nd, 2015. Like many Stanford students, on January 3rd, he forms a startup. Okay, the startup is called Striver, and then Derek shocks the world in sports by selling, in 3 months, he sells multi-year contracts to 6 NFL teams, and then sells to large projects, to everything from the U.S. Olympic ski team to the German national soccer team. Just transforms the way that athletes are training. But the interesting case is we give a demo. The company's called Striver, by the way, in full disclosure, I'm a co-founder of it, so I would like to disclose that to you. We give a demo to the University of Arkansas, which is one of the teams we trained, and what company is headquartered in Arkansas? Walmart. So Walmart, the head of training, who's a football fan, says, what you're doing there is having somebody look around to recognize a pattern, make a decision about that, and then tell someone else about it, is what every single Walmart employee has to do every day. So we started in one of the Walmart training academies. The new CEO of Walmart said, if you work at Walmart, I want you to be able to be better at your job. There's 200 training academies. Each one is within driving distance of a Walmart. So anyone can drive to these boot camps for a week and can learn how to get better at their jobs. So we started in one of them, and we did lots of training, including empathy training. We did difficult conversations with employees, for example, firing someone, very rare occasion, you don't get many reps in that. Difficult conversation with customers who are harassing you, issues about harassment. We also did non-empathy related things. So the scariest thing I've ever done in VR is not the plank, but it is Holiday Rush in Walmart. It is utterly brutal, cacophony, people coming all over, yelling at you. But because of turnover, Walmart only 1 in 2 employees have ever experienced it, so you can't train it otherwise. So really invaluable. So we started in one, and the qualitative data were quite good. People liked it. We then went to 30 of them, of these training academies, and trained lots of people, kind of control condition of 30 that weren't using VR, compared job performance later on. The numbers look great. We then went to all 200 of them, and in 2017, 2018, in a 1-year period across that, we trained 200,000 Walmart employees in VR. Then we decided that we were going to go to everyone at Walmart. And this is a tweet from Walmart saying, by the end of the year, we'll deploy 17,000 VR headsets for training. We actually didn't get this number 17,000 out until a month ago. But as of a month, we have installed 17,000 training systems in the stores at Walmart. So between 2 and 4 systems in every single store, we have 1 million people trained this year alone. And they are training issues ranging from, again, difficult conversations to issues of workplace discrimination, and also more physical spatial things such as Holiday Rush. Last example I'm going to give before I actually end on time and not make you hold up the Grim Reaper placard that you showed me, is Fidelity. So a pilot study that turned into a scaled conversion for Fidelity. When you talk to someone at a call center in Fidelity, you don't know this person, but they're going to give you advice that's going to change the course of your life. How much money you put into a retirement account, what you do in terms of penalties. These are real important decisions. The people that are talking to you, they're in a call center, and they don't know who you are. And so we started a program in which, this is going to sound weird, but you put on the goggles, and inside VR, you're inside a call center. And you look around, and there's all these other people in the call center. And you then have a conversation with a client, and you advise her or him about what needs to be done for their finances. And you have this conversation. Then we beam you into the person's living room. And you look around, and you say, this person's got a ton of bills stacked up. She's actually got crutches there, and she can't walk. And you get a sense of who that person is, and you go through some empathy training there. We then have you redo the call that you did with the person as a way of iterating. So all of this comes from the flight simulator. Think about the flight simulator. Why do we have a flight simulator? Because we learn by doing. We learn by doing and making mistakes, and make mistakes and get feedback. Okay. Obviously, for flying, that's a very expensive process, and you don't do it. But we've been instantiating that in VR, and so these people, they get this kind of feedback. I can send the news article that anyone's interested. Since they've started using this at scale at Fidelity, Fidelity has disclosed that the ratings of the customer service employees has gone up by 10% across the board. since they've started doing this. So everyone that's calling you, those ratings have gone up massively. It's just a great way to do the job. I will make a point about flight simulators. One of the things that we studied in the lab, but that we also have installed in a number of big companies right now, is interview training. Okay? And it actually began in football. So in football, there's something called the Combine. At the Combine, general managers go there and they evaluate players. And part of that evaluation is not just how they do on the field, but how they talk to people. And the gaffes and the horrific, I won't call them gaffes, the horrific events that have occurred in these conversations are legendary in terms of looking at somebody and based on how his hair is, saying, you know, what was it like having a drug dealer as a parent? What are you talking about? My mother was a doctor. The racist things that go on, and just because of somebody. So we started this in the NFL, and we built a flight simulator for doing an interview where somebody would basically train and they'd get feedback, including where they're looking. I had a CEO of a Fortune, we'll say a Fortune 50 company, come to my lab, and in one of these instances, you're interviewing a woman. And she's wearing a red dress, and you're talking to this woman who's wearing a red dress. And this CEO put on the goggles, went through the interview training. He had his C-suite physically in the room with him, 20 people that are important to this very large company. And the things he said to this woman in virtual reality training, you know, you just couldn't make it up. You just couldn't make it up. And that's a good thing. The reason it's a good thing is we want to pull that in VR, and then we want to correct it. And we want, what I don't like about most diversity training is it kind of, you do these exercises and it ends with this, boom, you're biased. Go home and live with that, okay? And what this gets to do is give you iterations to train. And so I'll leave that, and I want to talk about one court case to close. In 2011, the US Supreme Court ruled that violent video games are free speech. Okay, I won't bore you with the details of the case. It was about the governor of California wanted to have more stringent warning labels on violent video game. US Supreme Court ruled that it's free speech, can't touch it. However, Justice Alito wrote a concurring opinion. And in the concurring opinion, he said, video games are free speech, and this was 8 years ago, but there's this thing called virtual reality, and it's coming, and it's coming. And we need to rethink violence and experiences as they're inside of VR. And I'm glad that that precedent was set. I mean, people in this room obviously know more about these issues than I do, but there is a little line in the sand for us to think about. I often get asked by friends and family, what should and shouldn't I do in VR? And my answer is this. I'm not going to tell you what you should do and what you should not do in VR. However, what my advice to you is if there was a thing that if you did it in the real world, that night you couldn't go home, kiss your kids, you couldn't hug your wife, you couldn't sleep that night because you did that thing in the real world, my advice to you is don't do that in VR because it lingers. The brain treats it as real, you're using your body. So that's my advice to how to navigate these complicated issues, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Okay.
Thank you for the great talk. I'm a visiting professor at the law school. I'm actually using VR in my research right now. So just food for your thought and to see what reaction you have. So we're studying one famous theory in law, legal theory, that says litigation itself would create anger, and that anger will stop people from negotiating with each other. But in the traditional lab, it's very difficult to create a litigation setting to test this. So what we're doing, like very low tech compared to what you did, is like putting video by professional actors. We have this first person eye of being punched in the face, talking bad words. But it's not that you put on VR, look at the room, you are in a courtroom, but just like set up like traditional video, just put on a goggle like that. I just wonder whether you have any suggestion for us moving forward.
So just so I understand, you're using VR to induce an emotion, or you're using VR to induce an event within a courtroom that is emotional?
So our vignette is a lawsuit, and there are two parties in an experiment. They all put on VR goggles. They're talking bad words at each other. And we're priming them that, well, the other party has sent hitmans to hit you, and then they're in their VR experience, they will be like hit on by people in the video. That's what we did.
And the goal is to
create animosity against the other, and then we let them play bargaining games so that we see whether they don't make deals with the other side.
So A, I love it. B, my advice to you is try to, in the 360 video that you're using, try to make it such that there's head movements and there's a reason to turn around. Okay? I always say that in a situation when it's a conversation, if a dark room with a video projection can basically capture the essence, let's do that. Keep it high res, make it scale up easily, don't mess up your hair, let's do that. Where VR earns its keep is when you're leveraging the body movements that actually are natural to a scene. And you'd be stunned by how many people that build VR don't do this. I guarantee the one piece of useful advice I can give you is the next time you shoot that, make it so that you can't see both people at once in your field of view, spatialize sound to have to track you to over there, and just encourage lots and lots of body movements. We've got a new set of data that basically shows that we've got 3 or 4 sets of data with over 1,000 people in each one, that if you bin people who do an experience into high and low movers, the low movers are almost like they didn't do VR at all. The high movers are really, so more movement. But I think that's great. VR for inducing emotion. Look for work by a woman named Lee Williams. She's a neuropsychologist at Stanford in the med school that's looking at emotional induction in particular in VR. And she's got data sets of scenes that can induce emotions. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. David Gonzalez, Bristol Myers Squibb, actually the Global Chief Diversity Officer. And Kenji, thank you for the wonderful invitation. This was fascinating. My question is around habit formation. One of the biggest issues that we've got is really fostering a culture of inclusion, and we are leveraging the science of habit formation to be able to do that. 25,000 people around the world simultaneously trying to change behaviors.
Yeah.
Remarkable initiative that we're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
My question to you is there any research that talks about VR in terms of acceleration of skill and capability?
Yeah, so I love the question, and let me tell you exactly why this is a fit. The way that I do diversity training at Stanford, once every 18 months, I have a 2.5-hour session. And all of us do this. We've got a retreat. We've got, what we know about brain science, and in my PhD is in cognitive psychology, I've studied the brain for a long time before I defected to become a VR guy. The way we learn is not by these intense doses. Short, repeated doses, each one that's a little different from another, that are varied, we can talk about the schedule for variation, but the way one should learn and form habits is by lots of small doses over time, not cramming it all in on a weekend. And VR allows you to do that because it's on demand, it's always there, and it's easy for us to build the optimal training situation. So think about the best moderator that ever lived, okay, and how she runs her moderations at an event. First of all, there's only one of her. You can't scale her up. Second of all, she's got inconsistency. She has some days better than others. With VR, you can capture her at her best, build the scene around her, and then create natural variation in the scene. So in other words, we learn the best when you do stuff a lot where everything's a little bit different, but the core message is the same. So you can induce that variation. And so what we've come up with is an optimal schedule for how one can induce habit formation by leveraging what we know about neuroscience, ranging from rats to postal worker studies about there's a lot of good studies there. So I think that's exactly the right way. And again, my frustration when I first started doing this work, and my frustration with a lot of the ways we think about D&I is it just ends with making you aware of the bias and not giving you just the tools to just improve a little bit. We're not solving it. Right? VR doesn't solve bias, and I hope I wasn't giving that impression. It just gives us some tools to get a little bit better. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Jennifer Allen from PwC. So we've been working a little bit to try to figure out VR, and it's very expensive, so scaling it up is sort of hard. And I know augmented reality is cheaper. Does it have the same results or not?
The narrative that VR is expensive and had its time and AR is everything. So, so for those that don't know, augmented reality, you're wearing a pair of normal glasses like some of you have in the room. You see light from the physical world. We project a layer onto your glasses so that there's another digital layer. So I could look around. You could all have big name tags floating over your head. I could look really cool by calling out your name. Now, my lab is 50% in terms of our funding and our personnel, 50% working in augmented reality. So I am all in on AR for a reason I can get to in a minute. However, this narrative that AR is going to solve the vacuum. All right, so I'm going to make fun of Silicon Valley for a second, and of course I'm a part of Silicon Valley. We have ruined the metrics of success. If there's not hundreds of millions of people using something, it doesn't count. Right? There's now 10, 15 million of these goggles around, and when I first started, there was a couple hundred. And if you look at that curve looks very sane. It looks very sane. AR, how many AR goggles do you think exist in the world in terms of high-end goggles that you can actually look at? I don't know the exact number. I'm not going to pretend to. I would bet a lot of money it's less than 20,000, certainly less than 50,000. The other thing about AR is I don't want to get too much in the weeds. The narrative that AR is going to solve everything is mostly said by people who haven't tried AR. And I'm not trying to be rude about that, but AR has got some intense limitations for the next couple of years. That being said, over drinks, I'll tell you about how AR is going to save the world by making it so we don't have to fly anymore because you can beam someone in the room. And we built this in my lab. Hansul Jun, genius, has built a way to teleport someone in real time, and you see them in the goggles, and it's just spectacular. But that's not ready for a couple of years. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Please. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm just wondering if you've tried VR for any legal training, like simulating voir dire or client interview or other litigation techniques?
The one area in legal training that I've worked in, and I haven't worked in it for many years, is police lineups. So looking at the kind of, the memory issues that witnesses often have over suspects. And so what I like to say is police lineups are currently done in VR, it's just really bad VR. So this notion of live lineups is, no one does these, they're very expensive and hard to do. Most lineups are done with photographs in the police station while you're sitting at a desk. A photograph is an avatar that's taken from one angle, can't look around it. It's taken at one single time. If the person had a mustache, the mustache is there. We can go into the details. It's just kind of boring VR. And so we've done a lot of work where you simulate a crime in the real world, and then you have the suspect put on the witness put on the goggles and see a lineup of suspect. There's a notion of what a fair lineup is. And a fair lineup, if there was quintuplets identical, that wouldn't be a fair lineup. And if it was 5 people who are 15 years apart each, that wouldn't be a fair lineup. So there's a mathematical way to think about a distribution that we can do automatically in VR by kind of stretching pixels to get similarity metrics. But my favorite thing about all the data that we got is you can use, one thing I haven't talked about that's very relevant to the world of law is privacy in VR. So I'm going to talk about the good side of the data. We can talk about the bad side. If you walk around in VR, you're getting 6 data points from the head, X, Y, and Z, and pitch on roll. That's moving and rotation, and of the hands. If you walk around for 20 minutes, the file is so big you can't even open. It's 2 million data points about your body language and about who you are. What we can do is we can use that data then to use machine learning to parse out anything we want. In my lab, we've looked at people making mistakes. We've looked at people's emotions. What's relevant here is police lineups. It's notorious that witnesses are overconfident and often wrong. And there's a very low correlation between confidence and accuracy. Okay? But what you can do is you can now start to take the body language movement while they're examining these people and using big data, use it as a way to kind of parse out these false alarms and some nice kind of preliminary evidence there. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, please, you make the decision on who goes next. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm Julia Taylor Kennedy. I'm with the Center for Talent Innovation. We study diversity and inclusion in the workplace.
Okay.
And we've done a lot around bias. And this is amazing.
Oh.
I've been hearing about 10,000 cuts for a while, and so really a pleasure to hear you speak. Bias.
Just so you guys know, I'm at Stanford NYC for the next 11 weeks. I'm only allowed to use it at certain hours, but I can show you we have 1,000 cut.
Okay.
I'd rather you see Courtney because you should hear it from her. She's the genius that designed it, but I'm happy to show it to you too.
Oh, thank you. Good. So we'll follow. Well, yeah, we'll follow up on that.
Yeah.
Biases can be really tricky, right? Because what you experience can be accumulated over time, and that can have 2 effects. One is that you get better at navigating it. And so when you talk to the disability community, right, the experience of living blind for decades is very different from 10 minutes blind. Yeah. And then there's also an accumulation effect of pain, right? If you have the kind of microaggressions over 30 years then your experience of it might
Yep.
be more sensitive.
Yep.
So I'm curious if there are ways to build that kind of empathy that you've thought about that are hard to get at in 10 minutes of virtual VR.
Yeah. Interestingly, there's a study that's not in VR, published in a very good psychology journal, and I'm blanking on the author's first name, I apologize, where they basically had people go into blindfolds or not, and showed that the stereotypes actually became worse because you think that it's hopeless to be a blind person, whereas they learn how to cope with the world quite well over time. So a lot of data on that. I will say that in the history of VR and empathy, there's probably been 40 experiments, and my lab is probably responsible for half of them. So we just don't know anything, and we need to know a ton as a field. Courtney's vision for Thousand Cut in particular was not to change the minds of people who are intensely racist, card-carrying members of the KKK. It was to inspire liberals, whites who believe in the cause but aren't doing anything about it, to kind of move them along that. So that was designed for a very specific tool. In terms of reversing the bias, so I had the pleasure of talking to Professor Banaji at Harvard. She's I think Elena, you introduced me to her. I met her once before, but because of you, I got to talk to her. Thank you for that. And when our first study that we ever ran when a white person wore a black body, we ran something called the implicit association task afterward, which is a way you measure associations. What we found is when whites wore a black body in the virtual mirror and then had a pretty negative experience because we want you to walk a mile and feel prejudice, their IAT scores got worse afterwards. In other words, the body transfer caused you to become more biased afterwards. Now, when you think about the IAT, for those of you who don't know, you're seeing white faces and black faces, you're hitting buttons very quickly, and over time, you associate more quickly negative events with a black face to a white face. That's a measure of your bias. So our bias scores went up, but my colleague Mel Slater, who does a lot of this work, of the other 20 studies, he's done 18 of them, he always, in a nice academic way, yells at me, he says, Jeremy, what are you doing? You're putting people in bodies, they form an association with the skin color, and then they have negative events happen. Of course you're going to have the IT go up, right? And so it really, it's great to have these nuanced conversations. We're not reversing bias, we're educating in this instance. And in my opinion, going back to Professor Banaji, we agree that there's no way that this experience, even if you did it 100 times, is going to dent the IET score or these associations over time. It's not about that. It's about, and also I should say this because there's a lot of people that do D&I in the room. I am not lobbying that this should replace what you're doing. This is one tool that you use for 8 minutes a pop, and then it's a conversation starter, and this is not replacing what you're doing. This is another tool that you use in the barrage of tools to chip away at a problem that's really hard. So no, I don't have any answers or data for you on that. And yes, I'm hearing it's a problem and want to hear more. Yeah, good.
Hey, how are you?
Hey.
I'm an NYU student, study economics and psychology. One, I'm wondering how easy it is to capture data in VR, and then how effective it would be to apply it to, let's say, a public policy change or a business that wants to change its product price. And afterwards, if you could run simulations on it without inputting more data from the real world.
Ooh, so a lot to unpack there. You're going to give me an opportunity to spend 90 seconds talking about a set of slides that I couldn't. We do a lot of work to use VR to teach people about climate change. And particularly the oceans. And I had the privilege, so we built this thing called the Stanford Ocean Acidification Experience. I had the privilege to bring it to the US Senate and had a briefing where I had senators and congresswomen and congressmen and all the staffers. And we did all this work and talked to the ocean acidification, spent a couple days there. And of course, it did absolutely nothing for policy-wise. Previously, the previous administration, I spent a lot of time talking to USAID. And what we came up with as consensus, there's no way VR is going to change enough minds that we can make a dent in CO2 from the consumer side. So one way, it's kind of a depressing move, but it's still a good move to make, which is forget trying to reduce CO2 via VR. Let's focus on climate change adaptation, meaning countries are going to have to deal with climate change because it's here. We went to Palau. Palau is a small network of islands in Micronesia. 20,000 citizens there, the most amazing coral reefs on the planet. 100,000 tourists come there each year. Their economy is basically based on these tourists coming there. Climate change is going to decimate, first of all, their economy and then their islands. And Tobin, Asher, and Elise Ogle we went there, went on a dive boat. They were there for 2 weeks. I was there for 3 days. We captured all these amazing kind of before and after points. Long-winded, I'm getting to your point about policy. Okay, so the policies that Palau can do is they can reduce the amount of fishing in certain areas. They can train tourists better so they don't destroy the reefs, and they can stop cutting down mangroves that allow sediment to get into the ocean. So we built this VR simulation that showed them the destruction that was happening. And an interesting thing happened. So we had a chance to bring this to the lawmakers of Palau. Every senator and most of the House delegates, and so imagine going to Congress and getting 90% of the Congress people to do this VR simulation. That's what we did. The culture of Palau, they don't go in the ocean. They wade and they fish, but a lot of the lawmakers are afraid of sharks. So despite the fact that their economy is based on this reefs, no one had been to these spots that we'd showed them physically except for one of them. So when they saw the destruction that was going on, I mean, the amount of spontaneous anger and policy recommendation that happened in the room was stunning, and they actually changed law about how tourists can go diving based on that experience. So an instance where you can change policy, again, we're much smaller down in the weeds, but it was failed in the United States, went to a place where you can actually make a change. On the other two questions is how hard is it to collect data? Getting easier every day. A smart person with no computer science background can learn how to program in Unity or Unreal these days. Data collection, I urge you to read an article I wrote for the Journal of the American Medical Association. Came out about a year ago. Talks about how much data you can collect and the privacy concerns around it. For example, with about 5 minutes of your data, I can predict who you are, your age, your intentions, if you have a medical condition. It's a stunning amount of data with machine learning that we can do. And the coolest thing I've ever seen with changing content on the fly is by a company called Tripp, T-R-I-P-P. They use machine learning to basically, in the first few minutes of your body movements, they're actually changing the 3D models in the scene to form new worlds based on how you move. Yeah.
So I have two asks.
Okay.